Our dark fate starts with Sarah Connor having a schizo thread as she recounts a grim future in an old-looking recording. She says she has apocalyptic visions, and then she breaks down. Seems like she's talking to a doctor, and that her dreams weren't dreams but premonitions. Then she has an erratic episode and she's restrained. Let's go to the beach, where there's bones everywhere, like Normandy all over again. Sarah's narrating a hopeless future, where these doom-bring robots have replaced humanity on top of the food chain. Well, the good news is the extinction of humanity never happened, because Sarah stopped it all, along with her son John Connor. Suddenly, the T-800 is back and he's pumping John full of shells. It leaves, while Sarah mourns for her son.
And I am terminated.
22 years later, let's all go to Mexico. This bridge seems to have an icing problem. False alarm. It's just someone using a time-traveling vortex. Nothing out the usual. This couple tries to carry her to safety, but the 5-0 arrives. They're skeptical about the 2 street dogs carrying around this naked lady. They claim not to know her. They didn't do anything to her, and they're just trying to help her. But the cops restrain them anyways. One of the cops examines the woman, but surprise, surprise, she's one of them. She holds the guard down and flings the rest of them around like ragdolls in Gmod. The robot chick then stops and doesn't attack the couple. Then the dude thanks her. Famous last words. Cause the chick then steals the guy's clothes. She drives off while getting flipped off.
Don't thank me yet.
Someone else. This Mexican lady walking through the slums. Takes a few bites and then gets home. At home, she wakes up her Zoomer clout-chasing brother, then Daniela Danny Ramos warns her father, Mr. Ramos, to go do that checkup at the doctor's. She gets Diego Ramos, her brother, to come with her, so they say their farewells to their father. Walking down the halls, Diego takes a little time to flirt with the local chica, Julia, but her sister pulls him away. Look above. Another icing problem. Nah, it's a naked Terminator traveling back in time. This one seems to have liquid skin, as it mimics the clothes that this woman's holding. The liquid skin creeper then knocks on the Ramos residence door, and Danny's father answers. He introduces himself and he says that he's looking for Danny, but the father's sus about him.
Sí, claro.
Welcome to the Arius Motors factory, and this is where the Ramos siblings work. There seems to be a robotic arm in Diego's workstation. Then one of their bosses calls for Diego, but Danny goes instead. Suddenly, their father suspiciously is at the factory's gate, claiming he's here to give his kids their packed lunches. Also, somewhere at the gates is that blonde robot chick from earlier. She knocks one of the guards unconscious. Then the guards inside forbid Mr. Ramos to go in because he doesn't have safety gear. He goes away. Then that blonde Terminator steals that knocked out guard's uniform. Meanwhile, Danny begs to her boss to let Diego keep his job because some machine took it from him. Then lo and behold, the 2 robots are about to converge inside the factory. The father then meets up with Diego and claims that he has their packed lunch, but they already got it. Then he looks for Danny, but oops, there she is. The packed lunch there turns into a 9mm as he aims for Danny, but someone suddenly lets loose a hail of buckshot. It's that blonde chick from earlier. Danny tries to tend to her father, but this blonde is smarter than most cause, duh, you can see that robotic skeleton. Either they vamoose or they're all terminated. So they pick the first choice and blitz out of there. The liquid imposter retains its original form and chases after him. Then it launches itself to the blonde. Robot fight. The blonde stops her because it's hammer time. But Robo Venom here eventually gets the best of her sledgehammer. She nails her literally, and then Diego drops a 800-pound engine on it. Meet Grace. As her time for an introduction is pretty weird, but she escorts the 2 Ramos siblings out of the factory.
My name is Grace.
Guess she's not a robot because she claims to be some augmented human after she hotwires this pickup truck. Ay caramba, it's the one time. Look, an even bigger problem. The manslaughter machine is back with a big plowing truck. It's time for a destructive game of highway collateral damage, because their chase is probably going to have the local government mauled in. A few cars fly here and there, and doom comes knocking on their truck's bumper.
Can you drive? No, I mean I can't. I can't.
Grace gets Diego to drive and takes matters into her own hands. She javelin tosses a few metal rods, forcing Venombot to clone itself. She manages to make the big dump truck crash, but the robot's just too persistent. It slashes their truck's tires, getting run over in the process. Danny and the others crash lightly, but looks like Diego is shish kebabbed. Danny asks for help, but then their pursuer carjacks another ride.
Danny, we have to go.
Grace hears the bot rush into him and pulls Danny out of the car. The Terminator slams into their truck, and there goes Diego, reduced to fiery smithereens. Of course, Danny cries about it, and Grace takes her away. Suddenly, the Terminator slithers back into original form, while its other half also has Danny and Grace on the ropes. Suddenly, the cavalry arrives in the form of an automatic shotgun. It's Sarah. She's clocked in a few miles, but that doesn't stop her from using this rocket launcher. Sarah bombs the Terminator, and she'll be back. The two, however, ditch her. Gee, it's an amazing way of thanking her.
Son of a bitch.
In the car ride, Grace drops the fact that Danny's father had been terminated by the Terminator because it needs physical contact to replicate people. Suddenly, Grace is getting a little winded because her metabolism was tuned for short, intense encounters. Danny almost does the dumb thing, relying on cops, but Grace convinces her otherwise. Danny takes the wheel and Grace rides the back seat. Amazingly, Danny didn't crash the car while learning to use it, but Grace certainly crashed this clinic. She wants a specific medication, but she needs a prescription. That 9mm is her prescription. Then she goes shopping. After picking out what she needs, she collapses. Despite being held at gunpoint, one of the nurses still helps Grace up. Looky who's here. It's Sarah. She comes to get that thank you, and then she helps the girls in her car.
And you steal my truck.
Nice.
Danny introduces herself to Sarah, and she throws away her phone, as it reveals their location. The girls end up in a motel. Then they put Grace in a slumber of ice.
We should have done this in the bathtub.
Weird fact about Sarah, she puts her phone in a potato chip bag because the foil blocks the GPS signal. Want to know why? Well, Sarah's wanted in all 50 states. Then she injects Grace with all the medication she got earlier. Eventually, Danny laments the passing of her brother and father because they won't even get a proper goodbye. Suddenly, we have flashback PTSD, specifically Grace's, set in the dark future. Looks like their squad's on an assault mission. They get to the venue, but their ship gets blown to bits. Grace is tasked to rescue the commander inside, but they get overrun by the same advanced Rev 9 Terminators. After the rescue, she gets painfully treated because of the massive damage she took. Then she volunteers to be an augment. Grace wakes up to the barrel of Sarah's 9mm. She wants her to spill, but she also wants the same thing for Sarah. Danny comes in, so now Grace spills that she's just augmented. Sarah then reveals that she and her son changed the future, which is why Grace never heard of Skynet or the human resistance, despite being from 2042. Sarah says that one of the Terminators sent to hunt her son finally did its job. Then the interview's over because she says they gotta keep moving or the enemy's gonna catch up.
You two won't last 10 hours.
Sarah loads up the car and Grace gets one thing clear. Hurt Danny, and she rips Sarah's throat out. They ride off, and Grace reveals that a new rogue cyber-military AI called Legion was the one that sent the Rev 9 Terminator. Humanity never learns. It's the same crud, different timeline. Sarah says that she knew that they were on the bridge. Apparently someone keeps sending her dates and locations through texts, plus a "for John" at the end to taunt her. What's in those times and places? Well, Terminator spawn locations. Basically, she spawn camps them. She never found out who sent the texts. Then Grace does some cyberpunk BS and the Choomba tracks the sender. Apparently, Grace got some coordinates tattooed on her by her brother, and those coordinates are a failsafe in case the mission goes south. Apparently, the coordinates are the same with Sarah's mystery text buddy. Grace says it's time for a border cross to Texas. Then Danny says her uncle could help.
Yes.
They lose the car and go off-grid. Sarah tells Grace that she cares what happens to Danny because she was once like her, and it just plain sucks. Then they get on a train headed to go across the border. Meanwhile, the Rev 9 got into the government surveillance server room, and it tracked the lady's location. Grace reveals that in the future, everything just goes dark. Grace then recalls her childhood of witnessing a plane crash. Day 2, it was nukes. Then day 3 came and global war. That's not enough punishment for the human race, so famine came. She even says she witnessed her father get game ended over a can of peaches. Still not enough? Well, Grace said that Legion started hunting down survivors. Sarah then guessed that Danny gives birth to another resistance leader, but then Grace storms off yet again.
Danny gives birth to the one man that can stop it.
The next day comes and they get off the train, only to piggyback off a train. Danny arrives at her uncle's place and they're welcomed in. The uncle's wondering why Grace would want to get away, so Grace just spills the beans of an apocalyptic robot out to hunt him. They get the green light and are taken to the dry border. On the other side, this lovely lady comes and oh, wait, never mind, it's the Rev 9. It's hacking all the border cross UAVs and then spots them. Grace senses it, so the Rev 9 snitches on them. It says they're cartel members, and the Border Patrol is en route with lethal force.
Deadly force is authorized.
Eventually, the gang makes it to the border, with the uncle sending one of his lackeys in his stead. They go down and over and whoop, party's over. Looks like someone's a narc. They're asked to surrender.
Okay.
So they do just that. They drop their weapons, put their hands up, and are taken in by the police. Suddenly, drone kamikaze. Good thing Grace pushed Danny out the way. They're still taken in though, and while Danny tells the cops the story of a human hunting robot sent from the future, the doctors discover some weird metal parts under Grace's skin.
Never seen anything like this.
The Rev 9's on the move and in the facility. He passes off as someone who's going to pick up and detain Danny. Then Sarah Connor gets sacked by Officer Rigby and his boys. She's one of US's most wanted, so she belongs in her own cage. Suddenly, Grace has a rude awakening and knocks out all the guards, gets injected, and then steals one of their clothes. She spots the Rev 9, so she pulls down the fire alarm and everybody panics. Sarah uses this chance to free herself. Then Grace starts a prison riot. In the chaos, Grace busts Danny out, and they make for the exit, while the Rev 9 sleeves down everything in its path. Danny and Grace hijack a helicopter, then Danny distracts the Rev 9 with her puny Glock. Luckily, Sarah comes in and pulls her to the chopper, just barely escaping the Rev 9. The Terminator gives up the chase. Then Danny gets scolded for pulling a moronic stunt like that, even if it was to save Sarah. Ironically, Sarah agrees that Danny's safety comes first.
You cannot put yourself at risk.
At the midst of the chaos, the Rev 9 passes off as one of the guards from the detention center and asks where to get a helicopter. Speaking of which, after a few hours, the ladies arrive at the coordinates. It's somewhere near a forest. So after landing the heli, they trek the greens. Turns out there's a house nearby, so the girls get weaponed up and they knock on the door. Ta-da! It's the same T-800 that gave John Connor an early grave. Sarah loses it and is about to go on a trigger-happy havoc, but Grace pulls her back. The T-800 does confirm that he ended John. Grace takes the shotgun away. Then Sarah storms off, only for Danny to follow her into the forest. She's grieving that she's slowly forgetting John's face because she doesn't even have a photo of him.
But now I'm forgetting his face.
Grace reveals that they came here because of the coordinates tattooed on her belly.
Who gave you that?
Then Danny and Sarah return to the house. The T-800 eventually reveals it did settle down here in this timeline with a family. Then he apparently evolved to be more human. He even grew a conscience and started sending texts to Sarah because of him sensing the changes in the future. But Sarah's not buying this, so weapons free.
It's a Terminator!
Of course, the T-800 is a warbot, so he just shrugs it off. The T-800 declares he's willing to help Sarah protect Danny because he feels remorse. Soon, his wife Alicia comes, along with their son Mateo. In the sheets, the T-800 is known as the human name Carl, and he's apparently passing really well as a human, so much so that his own family doesn't know he's a Terminator. So Carl and Sarah actually agree on something, to use Danny as bait and lure the Rev 9 out. Grace doesn't want to risk Danny, but even she's adamant about it, to finally just end the Rev 9 once and for all. Grace is forced to agree, so it's time to show the toys. Carl's packing some serious heat. Even if the rogue AI doesn't come, Carl says that humans will eventually be really self-destructive, so he needs to protect his family with a little bit of Texan diplomacy.
You just keep this around?
Heck, he's even got a firing range, and they test Danny's aim. Well, she's blind as a bat with that 9mm, but Sarah gives her a KSG pump-action shotgun and tells her that the Terminator just brutally cut her family down. So she begins blasting watermelons. As serious as their toys are, Carl says they need an EMP to permanently offline a Rev 9. Sarah might know a guy. Problem is that the guy is 94 miles away from here, so they gotta get moving. They pack up, and Carl bids farewell to his family. Apparently, it might be a final goodbye, because he says his past caught up to him. Sarah promises that once all this is over, she's still coming for his head, and he understands. What a giga Chad.
I am going to kill you.
They head out, and just in time because that Rev 9 is already treading at Carl's place, keeping up with the Terminator gang. They're at an abandoned facility, while Carl's making some small talk with Danny about picking the right drapes. Suddenly, EMP guy Major Dean arrives at the rendezvous.
It's never good to see you.
He hands over the case, probably full of stuff, and Grace overhears something a little odd. Well, put your seatbelts on, because the Rev 9 is back. It opens fire on the whole place, raining bullets from the sky. Unluckily, the Major gets shot with a few of them. Soon it ditches the chopper and lets its other half pilot it, while it assaults Sarah's crew. Grace steps on it, while Carl's making the Rev 9 eat lead. The Major says to head for the airbase. Then he radios for reinforcements. They reach the base and conveniently park the van in the C-5 plane. The soldiers couldn't stop the Rev 9, so it went after the taxing plane. It shoots at the cargo deck. Carl's protecting Sarah. Understandably, she's still ticked off. The plane takes off. Then they blow the Rev 9's chopper up. It uses the explosion, however, to propel itself to Danny and the others. Guns aren't cutting it, so Carl tackles it out of the plane. The Rev 9 is still clinging on, so it's time to ditch the van. The van plummets down with the Rev 9, and Sarah manages to hold her cool and let Carl back on board. Grace says they need to figure out where to detonate the EMP, but new problem. The EMP is shot. Danny wants to keep on fighting, but Grace thinks that things are getting too risky. Whatever it is, it just makes Danny have more hope. So Grace spills that it was Danny that saved her in the future. When Grace was being gang-stalked by a bunch of hungry hooligans, it was Danny who came to the rescue and disarmed the goons. And she did more by rallying them up to arms, saying the real enemy is not each other, but the machines. Apparently, Danny was already rallying the survivors to be an army and have them take arms against this Legion. Legion wants her gone not because she gave birth to a future-saving son, but she is the future saver. She's essentially this timeline's John Connor.
She's John.
Suddenly, an air tanker comes for refueling, but he's a bit early. It's the Rev 9. It heads for the C-5, collides with the plane itself, and slashes onto it. The plane is blown open, and it's losing altitude. Grace saves Danny from an early end. Then Carl saves the two from that same thing. Suddenly, the Rev 9 gets in. Carl and the Rev are locked in combat, while Sarah, Danny, and Grace try to get ready for the Humvee paradrop. The cargo door is jammed, so the tussle continues, until Carl restrains the Rev 9 and blows the door wide open. The Rev 9 splits. The other half goes for Danny, but Carl's grenade launcher stops that. The Humvee falls out the sky, while the C-5 Galaxy rips apart. Grace deploys the chutes, but the plane crashes onto a nearby dam. The Rev 9 and Carl continue to beat the living metal out each other, until Rev sinks Carl under some plane debris. The ladies in the Humvee barely hang on by the dam's edge, and then the Rev 9 is on the prowl. Grace cuts the Humvee's strap, and all of them drop, including the Rev 9 who dives after Grace. Underwater, they get hunted by this thing, so they tangle it in a parachute while they swim to the surface. They make it towards the land, including Grace, and they try to find a way to run, but they're out of options. So Grace suggests another EMP, her cybernetics power source.
How do we get it out of you without killing you?
Just as they're in despair, Carl's back. He gives a syringe to Grace, and then busts the door open, leading him to the hydroelectric engines of the dam. Danny says that this is the place to make the final stand. Then the Rev 9 finally shows up. Boss battle time. And the crew take turns with that Rev 9. But it proves powerful, despite their combined efforts. Eventually, things turn around as Grace and Carl summon all their strength, but the Rev 9 proves too tanky to be taken down permanently. Grace and Carl hold it, and Carl grinds it against the generator, making the entire thing explode. Danny finds Grace heavily wounded, and Carl has the same damages. Sarah senses it's not offline, so Grace makes Danny rip out her power source to fry the Rev 9's neural net. Danny rips out the new EMP.
I'm gonna kill you, fucker.
Then she takes the fight to it. Sadly, it overpowers her, but Sarah finally pleads to Carl to help her, even calling out his human name. Carl wakes up and beats the Rev 9 stiff. Then Grace stabs it with the EMP. Carl then dredges the Rev 9 and himself to an electromagnet, melting himself and the Rev 9. Carl bids Sarah one last for John.
For John.
And it's all over. Danny and Sarah mourn Grace, but some time passes, and she smiles at this timeline's Grace being safe. Soon she leaves with Sarah and drives off to fight another day. Let's all have one last hasta la vista, because that's it for Terminator Dark Fate. What do you guys think about this robotically grim movie? Why don't you let us know in those comments below using that hashtag Cinema Recap. This was Terminator Dark Fate by Paramount Pictures, starring Linda Hamilton, Natalia Reyes, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Until another apocalyptic future arises, farewell.